last night.
Well, and the other side of that coin, Peter, you've got an offense that is allowing its tendencies to be read. You have an offense that isn't doing enough in Denver to stay ahead of whatever the Chiefs are seeing on film. And that's one of the realities here. Here's Sean Payton after the game on the struggles of the Denver passing game. Now 6 games in to the Sean Payton, Russell Wilson experiment. Not going well. Let's hear from Payton on how last night went.
Look, we came in, we knew third down was going to be a little bit of a challenge with obviously what they do defensively, but we wanted to maybe get to the line with some plays spontaneously, quickly. Overall, though, it wasn't good enough. And then there's a handful of plays that I even called that I look back on it and was anticipating one thing and got something else. So we've got to be better there. I mean, to win in our league, you got to be better throwing the ball, especially, I don't think the wind was that big of a factor.
Yeah, look, I feel like Russell Wilson's not going to be on that team next year. I know there's 11 games left, and he can get better on the fly, and he's been thrust into this new offense. But I feel like Sean Payton believed he could fix him, and he's not fixed yet. And it's not going to be Payton's fault this time. Last year it was the coach's fault. This year it's going to be the quarterback's fault. There's about $35 million in injury guarantees that become fully guaranteed in March. I think they're going to pull the plug before then unless we see something over the course of the next 11 games that will make Sean Payton think, okay, with the benefit of another full offseason, another full training camp, another preseason, we'll be ready to go. I'm not seeing enough from Russell Wilson that reminds me of who he was in Seattle. There's just something that's off. There's something that's missing. There's never any play that he makes that makes me say, ooh, that makes me say, wow, that makes me say he's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. It just kind of feels like everybody's going through the motions, and they're searching for something. Their running game is okay, but there's just something missing. And what's missing is an entire passing game, Peter.
Mike, my biggest question about this is, who's going to be his receiver core after October 31st. So for those who don't know, the trading deadline is October 31st. And that is 2 weeks away after this weekend of football. And I think my question is, what can you get for Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, second and first round picks respectively, who really have just been guys? And, so at this point right now, when you look at these two players, look, if you take them away, obviously it's going to really limit what Russell Wilson can do with this offense. But at this point, that's not as important as trying to get maybe one day 2 and one day 3 draft pick, if you can, for these two players. And that has to be the priority of the Denver Broncos and George Payton, the general manager, and Sean Payton, the head coach.
And I just realized I called Cortland Sutton Cam Sutton earlier like the moron that I am. But when you look at this offense, and you're right, what are they going to do without Sutton? What are they going to do without Jeudy? Well, what are they doing with them? 95 passing yards for a game for 60 minutes of National Football League action, 95 yards. That's 1971 numbers. That's not 2023 numbers. Not with the way the game has evolved. The rules have changed. It's all about passing game. Sean Payton's all about passing game. This is depressing. 13 completions on 22 attempts for 95 yards, sacked 4 times, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, passer rating of 46.6. That's just abysmal. And again, it's not going to be Payton's fault this time. Last year, it was Nathaniel Hackett's fault. This year, it's Russell Wilson's fault. And right or wrong, and you know how Payton is too, Peter. He's the ultimate don't double down on your mistakes head coach. And he'll have the conversation with Greg Penner, the owner of the team, George Payton. If George Payton even survives this year, who knows the way this thing is going. And I don't mean during the season, I mean afterward. But at some point, the conversation needs to be had. We made a mistake with Russell Wilson, and we can either double down on it and continue to struggle, or we can just rip off the Band-Aid, admit the mistake, and move on. And it just feels like that's where this is heading with 11 games to go in the regular season. But they're 1-5. Playoffs, in the AFC, and again, with 17 games, we don't know exactly what the magic number is of losses to either put you in a position where you've got to run the table or you're just done. But with 5 losses in 6 games, they're what? Maybe 2 losses away from being done? Maybe 3? And they've lost 5 in their first 6? I mean, it's over this year for the Denver Broncos, and they need to be thinking about next year. And I know Peyton will never tank. He's said on this program, it's completely contrary to everything you're trying to build within an organization. You try to win every single game. You don't go out there with less than a full deck. Now, maybe you've traded away some of your best receivers, so you kind of deliberately do that, but they're still going to try to win. But even in trying to win, Peter, they're going to be in great position to go out and draft some guys that can help this team turn around if they make the right picks, if they develop them well, and if they can find a way in a very difficult division to win some football games. But you have to wonder if you could get Sean Payton under a little sodium pentothal this morning or attach him to a lie detector test, if he'd admit he has any regrets about coming back when he did and taking this job when he took it.
I don't think so, Mike. My gut feeling is that Sean Payton still comes into work thinking that we're going to be okay. We're not doing anything this year, but I have enough elements in place on this team right now to really give us a chance to win. But Mike, I want to just ask two questions, because I am not really all that. I don't know the ins and outs of the salary cap hit that Denver would take with Russell Wilson, depending on whether they cut him or got rid of him somehow in either March of next year or March of the following year. I was always under the impression that when they signed him to that contract, it was going to be absolutely prohibitive to get rid of him without ruining your team for a year or two until 2025. So if indeed they decided to do this next year, what precisely, to your understanding, is the cap hit? Because it's listed at something like 80-something million if you cut him next year.
Well, they could cut him with the June 1 designation, and it would be $18.4 million for 2024, and then they would take the much larger hit. And I'm looking at $8.4 million per year for 4 years. That's $33.6 million plus another $20 million on top of it. It's a $53.6 million dead cap charge in 2025, $18.4 million in 2024 if they would cut him next year with a post-June 1 designation. But the problem is there's an injury guarantee in the neighborhood of $35 million that becomes fully guaranteed in March. So you're stuck. You're going to commit to future guarantees. You're going to tie your hands even more tightly to this quarterback if you don't cut him. And trading him, not an option, because you trade him pre-June 1 and you're taking the full cap charge of $80 million plus next year. But something's got to give. If he's just not the guy, what do? Do you just keep banging your head against the wall for a couple more years because you don't want to go through a year where you've got to do some heavy lifting to comply with the cap? Do you want to have a quarterback on your team who's going to have a big cap number if he's there or if he's not there? Do you want to keep the guy around? These are all decisions they're going to have to make. And maybe they do say, we'll take a $50 million cap charge in 2025. We'll plan for it. We'll work around it. We'll have a quarterback under a rookie wage scale contract, so it's not like we're paying a lot of money to our quarterback. We'll just bite the bullet and we'll deal with it. It's better than doubling down on our mistake. And the mistake was made when they gave up all that draft compensation and paid all that money on the way through the door, basically. I mean, it was a little bit after he got there, but big contract, big draft compensation, and Clearly, the Broncos regret that. Sean Payton may not regret coaching the Broncos. Clearly, at this point, the Broncos organization, if they were being candid, would admit they regret trading for Russell Wilson. So once you admit that, what do you do about it? That's going to be the big question that needs to be answered between now and whenever that guarantee vests from injury only to fully guaranteed after the season.
Well, Mike, there was we probably discussed it. You probably discussed it a bit, maybe with some eyebrows raised at some point last year in March. And at the time, nobody really made a big deal of it. I'm not saying I made a big deal of it, but I definitely noted this, that when the Denver Broncos signed Jarrett Stidham to I think it was 2 years, $10 million. I think his cap hit in 2024, the second and last year of the contract, is going to be $7 million. I think that's right. In my opinion, that was always done, not just to make yourself better and deeper at the quarterback position. That was Russell Wilson insurance. And, in my opinion, just a gut feeling, geez, I kind of think that Sean Payton must feel the way Josh McDaniels felt last year toward the end of the year. And we all remember this, the game where either, Derek Carr just disappears the last 2 weeks of the year, and Vegas has got to play either the best or one of the best defenses in football in week 17. They got to play the San Francisco 49ers. And what happens in that game? Jarrett Stidham throws for 365 yards, puts up 34 points. The best offensive output by far of this season. Even when Derek Carr was there for 15 games, he didn't do anything what Jarrett Stidham did against the 49ers that day. And I think even though Stidham played poorly in week 18, this reminds me of the old Bill Walshism, Mike. If I see him do something once, I can coach him to do it a lot more times than that. And that, I think, is the way Sean Payton and, honestly, Josh McDaniels, who wanted to keep Jarrett Stidham, felt after watching that game. And so I think that everybody's going to say, well, geez, who are you going to pick? Who are you going to draft? What are you going to do at quarterback? And I don't think Sean Payton feels like he has to do anything at quarterback, because I think he would give the job, at least temporarily, to Jarrett Stidham.
I've had a chance to refresh my memory a little bit on the details of the Russell Wilson contract, and here's the important thing to keep in mind. As I said, if they would cut him with a post-June 1 designation before his current injury guarantees become fully guaranteed in the middle of March, it would be an $18.4 million cap charge next year and $53.6 million in 2025. Now, that sounds like a lot. Here's the other side of the coin. If they don't cut him, his base salary for 2025 becomes fully guaranteed in March of next year. That base salary is $37 million. With the other cap charges that would apply for 2025, his cap number is $55.4 million. So you're going to have a $55.4 million cap charge with Russell Wilson on the team in 2025. You're going to have $53.6 million with him off the team in 2025. So if he's just not getting it done, it's all the more reason to move on. And they would create cap space net next year because they wouldn't have to pay him his salary when they move on from him. The cap number goes down. You avoid the $17 million that he would do to be paid next year. That creates cap space that could be kicked over to the next year to alleviate the cap charge. This is all the abracadabra that happens behind the scenes to justify these moves. But, Peter, it makes me feel strongly. That $37 million hanging out there, what was it that got Derek Carr benched it was $40 million that became fully guaranteed in early February if he wasn't able to pass a physical. They put him in bubble wrap because they didn't want him to have an injury that would linger just a few days past the Super Bowl, and they would have been stuck with $40 million under Derek Carr's name. That's the thing to watch. We get toward the end of the season, and all of a sudden Russell Wilson's not playing. That's your signal that he's gone before the $37 million in 2025 becomes fully guaranteed and straps him with a $55.4 million cap charge. He's gone before then, and they're keeping him healthy so they have the flexibility to move on from him before that $37 million becomes due. So I think that has to be creeping into their thought processes as this season goes off the rails.
Well, you know what else that means, Mike, in your telling about the cap over the next 2 years? It means that the Broncos are going to have to do some cap gymnastics to be able to be as competitive as they would like to be in 2025 if they indeed do get rid of Russell Wilson. And what that would entail, I think, is front-loading a few contracts, you know, with heavy cap numbers in 2024, and maybe even extending Jarrett Stidham and giving him a good bump for 2024, which would then allow you to say, okay, listen, I don't want Jarrett Stidham to hit free agency after the 24 season. I want him, on our payroll somehow, some way, at least through 2025, and maybe even, depending on how much I think I like him, through 2026. So, the Broncos, I wouldn't be surprised if, early in the offseason, you see the Broncos redo some contracts, or when they sign a free agent or two, signing free agents so that they can put a lot of the cap money in 2024 and lesser numbers in 2025.
And, here's depressing news if you are a Broncos fan, and this goes back to 2022. They do the trade for Russell Wilson fairly early in the offseason. Remember, once Aaron Rodgers decides he's staying put, that same day the announcement is made, we get the news that the Broncos have a deal with the Seahawks. Their plan A was Rodgers. Plan B was Russell Wilson. They pivoted to him immediately once Rodgers decided he was going to go back to Green Bay for another year. Wilson was under contract for 2 more years, and he had a habit of making his push for a new contract when he had 1 year remaining on his current deal. That's how he did it in Seattle. Seattle went along with it. Russell Wilson wasn't clamoring for a new contract. This news came out of the blue September 1 of 2022, just before the season began, when they gave him this gigantic contract that ties their hands and puts them in a position to have these massive cap hits. And in hindsight, Denver, beyond the question of why you traded for him, why did you give him the new contract? Why did you do this? You had no reason to do it, unless secretly behind the scenes, Russell Wilson and his agent Mark Rodgers were rattling the cage, banging the drum. We want this contract before this relationship officially begins with a regular season game. Unless they were demanding it, why did you do it? And Peter, if I'm George Payton, I'm starting to think about where my relationships are with other teams and where I could go be an assistant GM, because ultimately, he's the one. Now, look, they didn't do the contract until the Walton Penner Group took over, but they're deferring to the recommendation they get from the guy who's been there. George Payton is the one that this mess is going to stick to if this Russell Wilson thing ends up being a situation where they don't know what to do. They're caught in a house of mirrors, and they can't get out of it without taking a big-ass cap charge in 2025. Whether they have him or whether they don't, they are stuck. So it's not good for the Broncos. And they're going to have to do some of the things you're suggesting. They're going to have to be very creative with their cap mechanics going forward, 2024 and 2025. But you're going to have that problem with Wilson. You're going to have that problem without him. And if he's just not getting it done, Peter, go ahead and have that problem without him.
Yeah, I mean, I think my gut feeling is that, you see what Peyton has done now with Randy Gregory and Frank Clark. And I think he's going to say, look, we have some guys on this team that we're not going to move. And we have some guys who I don't think he wants to move Justin Simmons. I'm certain he doesn't want to move Garrett Bowles, at left tackle. But, you can't just think that somebody is going to trade you at 2 for Jerry Jeudy, who's been borderline invisible since he got there. And so I think for Denver to get real draft value out of the trading deadline this year, they've got to consider trading. And look, it's not that I think Justin Simmons is really, really good. Okay. He's a top 12 to 15 NFL safety easily. But you ask the question, he's in his 8th year. I think you have to identify guys who's going to still be on this team when we think we're going to be a contender, which maybe you could fantasize yourself into thinking, we can contend next year, but more realistically, it's probably 2025. So to me, the only guy you're not trading is Patrick Surtain. And, and everybody else, to me, if the phone rings, you got to answer it and you got to talk to him. Because remember 2 things, Mike. So the Broncos have their first-round pick next year. They don't have their the pick last year that they traded to Philadelphia. So I'm sorry. They don't have the pick they traded to New Orleans. I was looking at New Orleans trading a pick last year to Philadelphia. But Denver's 2 next year goes to New Orleans in the Sean Payton trade. So essentially what you have right now is you have 1 pick in the first 2 rounds with the hope of getting more than that back when you start dealing people before the trading deadline.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.